Libra, the scales, September 24th through October 23rd. How to recognize Libra. Your face is the same as everybody has. The two eyes, so nose in the middle, mouth under, it's always the same. Now, if you had the two eyes on the same side of the nose, for instance, or the mouth at the top, that would be some help. Librans hate to be rude, yet they'll straighten the crooked picture on your wall and snap off your blaring TV set. Librans love people, but they hate large crowds. Like gentle doves of peace, they go around mediating and patching up quarrels between others. Still, they enjoy a good argument themselves. They're good-natured and pleasant, but they can also be sulky, and they balk at taking orders. Librans are extremely intelligent. At the same time, they're incredibly naive and gullible. They'll talk your ear off, yet they're wonderfully good listeners. Librans are restless people, but they seldom rush or hurry. Are you completely confused? You are not alone. There's a frustrating inconsistency to the sun sign that puzzles the Librans themselves as much as it does others. Lots of people will tell you that Libra is all love and beauty and sweetness and light. That's fine as far as it goes, but it stops a little short of accuracy. It also stops short of Eugene O'Neill. Just because the sign is symbolized by the golden scales of justice, don't ever think that Librans are always perfectly balanced. It seems to be a logical deduction. After all, the purpose of the scales is to balance. However, did you ever watch the balancing process on a pair of old-fashioned pharmaceutical scales? The ultimate goal is to get both sides even, but what happens? First, one side is low, then the other, up and down. They dip until there's perfect balance. Drop into a friendly neighborhood pharmacy and watch them in action. Just tell the druggist you're trying to figure out what makes Aunt Martha tick. Never again will you have a mental picture of a Libran as a calm, perfectly balanced, sweet, gracious, and charming individual. You'll have a mental picture of a person who has that kind of disposition half of the time. The other half of the time, Libra can be annoying, quarrelsome, stubborn, restless, depressed, and confused. Libra is first up, then down. He swings one way, then another, suddenly like the scales. Perfect balance. It's heavenly, but there's always that period of weighing and dipping before the moment of heavenly balance is achieved. The physical appearance of these people may require almost as much concentration as the personality. There's no such thing as a typical Libra feature, unless it's the Venus dimple. Libran features are almost always even and well balanced. They're pleasing, but not very noticeable, so it's easier to start with the dimples. There will usually be a couple in the cheeks or one in the chin. If they're not in the face, you might check to see if the knees are dimpled. Many Libran knees are, but be careful. Very few girls will believe you when you tell them you were staring at their knees because I wanted to see if you were born in October. Be discreet, but check. With the men, of course, the trousers rule out that clue, unless you're on the beach or playing tennis. Don't get discouraged. If you find dimples, then discover the person was not born in October. Those fetching dimples have a right to be there because he or she will have a Libra ascendant, so your guess is still correct. After you've ruled out the Venus dimples, or in or out, notice the entire effect of the face. It will always wear a markedly pleasant expression, even when the Libran is angry. Somehow, he or she will manage to look mild, or at the very least, neutral. Venus voices are typically sweet and clear as a bell, and these people seldom raise them to a shrill or bellowing pitch. A Libran is the only person on earth who can say, "I hate you and I'm going to punch you in the nose," and sound as if he's reciting Browning's "How Do I Love Thee." The mouth is gradually bow-shaped, and the lips would have been described in Gibson Girl days as lips like cherry wine. The fact the typical Libra face reminds you of nothing so much as a box of bonbons or a sugar cookie. Some of them look like human lollipops or a caramel sundae topped with rich whipped cream. They like to eat those things too, and if any Librans are reading this, they're probably weak with hunger by now. The women are almost invariably pretty, and the men are usually handsome. Still, not all of the beautiful people in the world are Librans. Venus beauty is in a class by itself, and it's not always easy to separate it from the good looks of other sun signs. My own secret way to recognize them is to begin by thinking about the sweet expressions of Dwight Eisenhower and Brigitte Bardot, and then go on from there. The trouble is that sometimes the women will look like Ike and the men like Bardot. You have to make allowances. I'm not implying that the Libra woman is masculine. Most of them are about as female as the average man can stand, unless there's an aggressive ascendant. And I certainly do not imply that Libra men are feminine. They're usually quite virile male animals. But there's no denying that they have a purity of feature that keeps you from getting them mixed up with prize fighters or wrestlers. Even the rare Libran who might be called ugly, and it will be most unusual to find one, has such a charming expression, you're persuaded to comment that there's real beauty of character in his or her face. You'll never meet a Libran who doesn't have a smile like a soft white cloud. That Venus smile could melt a chocolate bar at 20 paces. When it hits you full force, it has enough candle power to transfigure even plain or downright homely features, literally, not figuratively. Most Librans are full of curves rather than angles. Their hair is often curly. They're not necessarily fat, though a Taurus ascendant can produce some pretty plump pigeons. Still, they can fool you, go on a diet, and cut quite a trim figure. But even so, the curves will be there in spots, rather like a slim hourglass shape. Using Bardot once more as an example, one certainly could not call her fat, but could one call her skinny? There's one more trick in mastering the Venus appearance and physical characteristics. You'll notice a bright, living laugh that rings with merriment. Once you've heard it, you won't soon forget it. Now, you might think that to be born attractive and dimpled, to seek fairness and loveliness, to be pleasing and easily pleased is a blessing. You might imagine that gentleness and intelligence, grace and understanding are gifts of a fairy godmother. You might be right. When the Libra scales are balanced, it's utterly delightful, like meeting an angel from paradise. The problem is that fairy godmother. She keeps rapping one side of the scales with her wand and then the other, making Libra dip back and forth. She can't seem to make up her fickle mind whether she's made a mistake or not, and she passes her indecision on to Librans. First, they'll talk up a storm and monopolize the conversation. Then they'll listen intently with flattering interest. When others are fighting, they'll play the role of peacemaker and smooth everyone's ruffled feathers. Then they'll turn right around, deliberately take the other side in the discussion, and start an argument for the pure relish of it. They seek harmony, yet lots of Librans indulge in excessive eating, drinking, or lovemaking, completely upsetting the cookie cart, not to mention throwing harmony out of kilter. In fact, you'll come across a few Librans who will remind you of Dr. Doolittle's push-me-pull-you animal. The sun sign itself is known as lazy Libra, and that's another inconsistency. For days, weeks, or months on end, Librans can be too busy to play. They'll burn gallons of midnight oil, and then rise and shine in time to hear the rooster crow. It wears you out just to watch them. Suddenly, they'll plop down into a chair and say, "I'm bushed," and give the best imitation of laziness you've ever seen, especially after all that frenzied activity. Once they've plopped, you won't catch them moving a muscle if they can help it. It will be an effort for them to pick up a spoon or raise a glass, though they will manage. If there's anyone around who's willing, they'll expect to be waited on hand and foot. When the scales have dipped down towards lethargy, you couldn't move a Libra with a steam shovel. He'll talk, read, yawn, snooze, watch TV, or stare out the window, and seem barely able to make it into the bedroom, though he'll manage. All the nagging and shouting in the world won't impress him. It's as if he were in another world. After a period, when he's recouped his forces, he'll feel a spurt of energy, get up and start chugging down the track again. His nose will go back to the grindstone and his hands and feet will fly. Once more, he'll work like a mule in a harness, keeping a miraculous balance and a steady, even pace as he harmoniously plans his chores with efficient ease. Although Libra is not a dual sign, most of their friends think they know two different people. Try to tell someone who has frequently seen a Libran in the midst of an upswing that Libra is lazy, and he'll stare at you blankly. Conversely, if you try to tell someone who's been exposed to the Libra lassitude that this creature is a bundle of powerful drive, He'll retort with, "That lazy bum? You must be kidding." Librans know instinctively that to restore harmony to the body, they must alternate their active spells with complete rest. Their personal arrangement of genes and cells and electrical impulses demand it, and most of them are pretty adept at managing this delicate physical balance. However, harmony of the mind and emotions isn't always as instinctive with them. They can weep with overflowing sentiment, turn sharply sarcastic, then be as bright and cheerful as the first robin in spring. It's not at all the duality of Gemini. The Libran is constantly dipping deeply into one emotion and then the other, by turns, which isn't the same thing as the complete change of character of the Gemini twins. There's a deep richness to Libra's emotions, no matter which emotion is high or low at a given moment, and a philosophic approach to both sorrows and joys that seldom fails to smooth things out evenly. An instinct for sanity keeps most Librans mentally healthy and physically fit. Usually, they avoid serious breakdowns of body and mind. The biggest threat to their health is overindulgence of some kind. Eating sweets can bring on obesity, stomach disorders, and mottled skin. Excessive use of alcohol can cause severe kidney and bladder disturbances, which in turn result in violent headaches of migraine intensity. Giving into depression can cause an itchy sensation in the skin and even boils. The breast area is a sensitive part of the body, and sometimes there are foot problems and intestinal disorders, though these aren't as common. Ulcers beset many a Libran, not from worry as much as from abuse of the digestive system and the topsy-turvy emotional makeup. Generally, Librans are healthier than most people unless they push themselves too hard and forget to take those necessary rest periods. The effect of peace and harmony on Venus health is miraculous. When they're ill, they need enormous amounts of prolonged rest, with no discordant emotional situations to plague them. Pleasant books, soft music, and soothing words. Such an atmosphere rarely fails to put the typical Libran back on his feet quickly. The Libra character is made up of just about equal parts of kindness, gentleness, fairness, plain cussed argumentativeness, stubborn refusal to capitulate, philosophical logic, and indecision. It's best to examine these ingredients in detail. The argumentativeness, for instance, a Libran will argue with you about what time it is, if he thinks your watch is 2 seconds off. Don't try to get away with the generalization like, teenagers are ruining the country. You'll get a logical, careful dissertation about the Peace Corps and how many wonderful youngsters there are in the world, even if his own children are defiant dropouts. Make a remark like, the law is so corrupt today that all judges and lawyers are dishonest. And he'll go on for hours about the divine protection of justice in this country, the virtues of the jury system, and the problems of lawmakers, going back to Roman law and continuing through the Code Napoleon. Never say casually, it's foolish to live in the city when you can live in the country. There's no comparison. That last phrase especially is a huge mistake. Just mention the word comparison and the average Libran is off and running. He can compare all night long with refreshments at intervals. He'll extol the beauties and advantages of the cities compared to rural areas, describe the bright lights, honking taxi horns, theaters, museums, and parks in glowing terms, even if he himself lives in suburbia. And you couldn't blast him out with dynamite. It wouldn't make a bit of difference if you took the opposite view in any of these cases. The Libran would then expound on the rising teenage crime rate, the corruption of the courts, and the joys of country living. He doesn't really care which side he takes in a good argument, as long as it's the other side. Sometimes, if he gets bored, he can switch sides in the middle. Tell him you like a movie, and he'll tell you what's wrong with it. Criticize it, and he'll praise it. Rave about a new book, and he'll list its shortcomings. If you found it dull, he'll point out its virtues. Throughout all this constant logical deduction, the Libran will try to remain fair. Libra dreads the appearance of prejudice, unjust accusation, and blind faith equally. What he seeks is the real truth, the exact balance that gives the correct answer, after weighing all possibilities. It's an admirable trait, of course, but all that weighing can drive a positive person simply wild. It can drive the Libran himself into a state of constant indecision. Even the most controlled Venus men and women dislike making instant decisions without taking all the possibilities into consideration. fairness can be a fetish. The Libra in general, with his qualities of balanced, harmonious judgment, make an excellent strategist, and thoughtful planning can win a battle before it's fought. His ability to see all sides, to smooth nerves and calm angry tempers, can make him the finest kind of mediator, bringing people who hate and mistrust each other together and getting them to work in harmonious cooperation. However, war makes all Librans secretly heartsick. They hate bloodshed. An October-born officer in the armed services will let someone else make instant decisions under fire, while he brilliantly charts the strategic maneuvers that will save thousands of lives in the long run and still win for his side. This antipathy to making a decision can turn into quite a stalemate with the ones who have adverse afflictions between their planets at birth. There are some who can't decide which shoe to put on first in the morning, let alone which side of the bed to get out of. Even the average Libran you meet at the office or a party will always reflect to some degree this tendency to weigh things back and forth until you get the jitters, and the time for decision is long past. And they'll say, if I do this, such and such will happen. On the other hand, which is one of their all-time favorite phrases, if I do that, then such and such could occur. Those scales can dip crazily up and down like a seesaw. Nothing is more painful to watch than a doubtful Libran trying to make up his mind why, wherefore, and whether to. He doesn't like to be hurried or pushed while he's deciding either. An impatient person can turn the airy Libran into a sudden spell of earth stubbornness that would make Taurus the bull look like a gullible pushover. Impatience is one quality most Librans can't stand. Flighty, rash, impulsive people who don't stop to consider the consequences give them the jitters. It's amusing that Librans will always immediately deny their indecisiveness. The first thing they'll say when they're describing their sun sign will be, I'm not indecisive at all. That's not accurate. It certainly doesn't describe me. Hide your smile. Translated, this denial means that although he takes a devilishly long time to make up his mind, which he very conveniently forgets, once he's reached a conclusion, he's quite gung-ho about it. If he's been allowed sufficient time, his eventual final decision will be carried out with such forceful conviction that it misleads him into thinking he is firm and decisive. Don't let it mislead you. Anyway, when he tells you he has no trouble making up his mind, he's just starting a typical Libran argument, and you can tell him so. It will do him good to realize that, even in the midst of his objections to his astrological traits, he's proving the truth of his sun sign. When he denies your analysis of him, just say smugly, I expected you to take that attitude. Librans always argue every point. It will drive him crackers, but it may help him realize the truth, and the truth is what he seeks. He's bound to see the logic in that. Telling him he's being unfair and refusing to consider both sides will take him down a notch or two also. Very few Librans are markedly eccentric or show-offs. Most of them are as wholesome and as well-balanced as a neat field of wheat, swaying back and forth gracefully in the wind. They're normally scrupulously honest in business deals, and there's very little carelessness about them. Libra would rather take his time and get it right than make a false start and have to repeat the process. They hate exaggeration, and they're repelled by embarrassing displays of anger and passion, though they themselves can be guilty of both extremes if they're pressed beyond their endurance. Most Librans have a fantastic ability to concentrate and to ponder deep subjects. They are born with an affection for books and such a respect for the printed word that many of them scorn paperbacks. They feel it's not a book unless it's a hardcover, and it smells and feels like a book. You're almost sure to find an extensive library in every Libran home. They love the harmony of sounds, colors, poetry, and the proper use of words, both written and spoken. Rarely do they escape the influence of the arts. A Libran is a gentle, tender lover of all that's good and clean and lovely underneath, whatever image he may project when that fairy godmother wraps one side of his scales. He's an artistic soul at heart, who enjoys spreading the soft blue and pastel shades of Venus at parties and cultural occasions. Soft light, mellow music, interesting conversation, good food, and fine wines turn him on. His mind has both the brilliance of a diamond and the smoothness of an opal. He moves in the changing element of air, and reflects the usefulness of copper, his harmonizing metal. There's a touch of the cool Libran mint in his alert reasoning and his sharp sense of humor, and 6 dimensions of peace shine down on him from Venus. To truly understand Libra, you must understand the riddle of the scales. One side heaped high with October's vivid golden leaves, suggesting brisk autumn weather, and the other side holding up sky blue bunches of shy violets, drenched in the fresh scent of April rain. When the scales dip, bright optimism turns into silent panic, weighed down with lonely depression. When they balance, they produce a perfect harmony between its rich, crackling intellect and his affectionate, sympathetic heart. The season holds Libra's secrets. Winter is too cold for him, summer is too hot. He must blend them both into a perfect fall and spring.